I would like to introduce myself. I am Tabitha Watchin, the social emotional learning facilitator for the East Providence School District. And tonight we are bringing you Dr. Ellen Flannery Schroeder, from a professor from URI who also directs several anxiety clinics locally. Dr. Flannery Schroeder is here tonight to talk with us about strategies for coping with anxiety for both parents and students as we begin to think about returning to school. So I am going to turn it over to you, Dr. Schroeder.
Thank you. I first want to just start out by thanking you all for attending on one of those evenings that is, they're few and they're precious, and we don't have many of them left. So your decision to join us tonight is particularly thoughtful, and I'm flattered. And I will try to make this next hour and a half worthwhile, so that you'll be glad that you came. So I'm going to talk about going back to school. No surprises here. It's not normal for so many reasons. It's not normal because we're kind of in the middle of a pandemic. I don't know. I say middle. I don't know. Are we at the end? I'm not really sure where we are. And then also what we all thought back to school was going to look like is turning out like, maybe it's not going to look like what we thought it was going to look like, or what we had hoped it was going to look like. And, putting all of that aside, if we just minus the whole pandemic, wouldn't that be great if we could? Just going back to school alone brings tremendous anxiety for so many kids. So we kind of have these layered things going on that are creating a lot of anxiety for students and for parents. So I want to, for a moment, take us back to before the pandemic. So I want you to think about your life in, let's say, December 2019. It's hard to think back because so much has transpired, but I want you to just take a few moments, think about where were you? It was the holiday season. It was 2019. Everybody was looking forward to 2020. What was it going to bring? Now I want you to imagine that in December of 2019, you went to a fortune teller who said, well, let's take a look in the crystal ball and let's see what lies ahead for you. And you look into the crystal ball of 2020 and you see the following. Empty stadiums with sports teams playing. The world is temporarily closed. Empty supermarkets. People who have a tremendous desire to connect but can't, really can't, but find creative ways to be able to do it. Kids who ordinarily are flocking together are actively being held apart by teachers and teachers' aides. Why, you wonder? What on earth is going on? People are sitting in circles. What's happening? Kids are in squares. People are in boxes. People are probing your nose, up towards your brain. There's chaos ensuing. There's civil unrest in the streets. More civil unrest. Wildfires. An attack on the Capitol. If someone were to show you those images or told you the story of what you would be encountering across 2020 and into 2021, you'd be terrified. You'd be confused. You wouldn't know what happened or what was happening. You wouldn't want time to proceed forward. I mean, I just take a moment. I can remember that I was sitting on the couch one day watching the news, and I don't know what story they were coming, but I had this thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe this imagery has almost become, I don't want to say normal, but I had lost the significance of it all, because there had been so much of it. And our bodies naturally, and I think thankfully, habituate to stressful events. But I want to stop and remind you, and we're going to get to a happier place. So I don't mean this to be a downer or to be morbid, but I really do want you all to appreciate what year and a half you have been through and what year and a half your kids have been through. And if you ever knew it was coming, you would say to yourself, I can't handle that. I'm not doing it. I can't handle it. But you did. Fast forward, here we are, August 2021. We almost even made it through August, and you're still standing. You made it through. You would have underestimated your ability to cope. There's no doubt. You would have been like, I'm not equipped, can't do it, I won't survive it. But yet here you are. You've coped with it, and you're still standing. So again, not to really harp on this too much, and we're going to move away and get to sort of more practical strategies and hopefully more hopeful ideas and thoughts. But I really do just want to highlight some of the impacts that COVID has had on our students and on our family, on our families, on our schools. And so some of these don't even need too much highlighting. I'm just going to quickly sort of read through them. Worries about health and safety have never been more significant. People worry about their very lives, their ability to survive the pandemic. Social isolation, particularly for students who are in a developmental phase where they need to connect with their peers. That's what they do. That's what they're supposed to be doing. And all of a sudden there are these conditions which require that they can't do that. Developmentally normative and strategic event can't happen. Kids have to stay home. Or some kids are staying home because they're remote learning. Other kids are going to school because they're hybrid or for whatever reason. They're in school, other kids are remote, full-time. Friendships are shifting, right? You can't, so now, maybe depending on where you lived. So in the middle of the pandemic, when everybody's socially isolating, maybe some kids saw their neighborhood friends and friendships have shifted because of that. Or the kids that went into school together versus those kids who are virtually learning from home have developed new friendships. So now not only are you not seeing your friends, but your base of friends may have changed. That lack of physical closeness, we know how incredibly important that is. Just, you always see on TV that sometimes they highlight teachers who have a special handshake or a choice of 3 different handshakes for the kids coming into the classroom. Like, do you want a hug or a high five, or do you want to dance? The reason that's so heartwarming is because that little bit of physical closeness to start your classroom is really, really significant. It is a mood shifter for people. It changes the way that we feel, and it establishes really important interpersonal connections. Everybody's moving less because we're staying home. We don't even have to walk to the car these days. Everybody's sleep is disturbed for a variety of reasons because now your schedule isn't what your schedule was, or for the past year and a half, your schedule has been disrupted. You've been home when you ordinarily would have been at work. You've been able to stay up because you could sleep in. Or you just stayed up worrying because times are really sort of uncertain and a little bit scary. So kids have had tremendous difficulty with attention and focus for lots of reasons that I'm not going to go through. I don't have to talk with you parents about learning loss. I will say, though, that there's some research that does suggest, yes, this cohort of kids is behind in learning their fundamentals. But there also is research that suggests that they're not as behind as people thought they were. So I don't know. I think in the end, when there's more research done, we're really going to know where this COVID cohort is, or where these COVID kids end up in terms of what did they miss out on, and what are those long-term repercussions of COVID, educationally speaking. I just don't think we know what they are yet. We know there's educational inequities. Some kids who weren't coming into school Families had wealth and means to be able to set up home learning environments, and they brought in, guest teacher. They paid for an in-home tutor. And then there are other kids who, can't even access the Wi-Fi because they don't have Wi-Fi in their home, making, education inequities huge. Parent and student burnout. I had originally prepared this talk, and I was talking about parent burnout, because so many parents were at home trying to help their kids. I mean, just trying to do their own job and help their child and be everyone to be multiple roles to their kids. And I was showing it to my daughter and her friend said, parent burnout, what about student burnout? So I added that in. We're all burned out. We're all doing the best that we can. Food insecurity, I don't have to go into too much depth on that. There's been family financial strain with parents out of work, parents losing jobs, losing homes, losing income, losing family members to COVID, disrupted routines. The things that we used to do are changed now. And one of the things that certainly produces tremendous anxiety is uncertainty. When we don't know what's going to happen, even if we know what's going to happen and we know it's going to be bad, not knowing what's going to happen is often more unsettling and anxiety provoking than knowing for certain that something bad is going to come to pass. So I've listed here a few. These are actual quotes from actual students. They're getting a little aged now because they are quotes that were taken from earlier last school year. But I left them in this talk because they're really meaningful, and I think they give us a good eye into what kids are feeling. So my brain feels broken. And we know now, I just heard some research recently that kids are getting, there's a higher incidence of visual strain on children's eyes from all of the screen usage. So their eyes may be broken as well as their brain feeling broken. I was getting really lonely, very lonely. I wake up, go on my school, because of course it was virtual, going outside, work out, go back to sleep, and repeat. School's about learning, but you want to see your friends and have social interactions. But now we're like 6 feet apart in the hallways. We have masks on. So when I talk, nobody can really hear me. That one really gets me. I don't know if I know how to make friends anymore because I've been so socially isolated. And now I'm going to be re-emerging into the social scene, but I don't know if I know how to do it. And honestly, you are kids and you will be rusty. Your social skills will be rusty. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. As a freshman, you should have a pretty good relationship with your teachers, but I didn't even know my teacher. I haven't even seen them except for their online faces. So take a moment to think about that disjoint. One of the greatest pleasures of watching my kids go through their schooling has been seeing the relationships that they've developed with their teachers, and watching the growth that they get from that mentorship. And, to imagine that connection, that source of mentorship is not what it was. It's not absent, or it hasn't been absent, but it's not what it was. So all that stuff adds up. You're carrying it, I'm carrying it, your children are carrying it. Let's not forget that. So I want to just take a moment to be sure that we're all talking about the same thing when we start talking about anxiety. So what is it? We'll do a little definition. So anxiety is a person's response to the perception of threat. So we're, existing, I'm out for a walk, let's say, and I'm walking through, a path and I hear something rustle in the bushes. My brain perceives a threat. Oh, it could be a bobcat. It could be a ferocious dog. And so my brain perceives a threat and I become anxious. Now, actual threat doesn't have to be present. So maybe the wind is rustling through the leaves and there's actually no threat. And maybe I even identify that it's, oh, maybe it's the wind. I don't see anything in the leaves or in the brush, but I might still feel scared. So anxiety doesn't have to have a real threat. It's really produced by the perception of threat. And it might be helpful too, just to take a moment to distinguish between fear and anxiety. So if there is a real true threat in the environment, you're walking through the woods and you happen upon a bear. Bears are scary. It's a real threat. Bears can attack you. In that case, the individual would feel fear. It's a realistic threat. The bear can harm you. If you're walking through the woods and you come across a cat, that cat really can't harm you. So if I have the same sort of anxious response, I'm not going to call that fear. I'm going to limit the term fear to worries that are warranted. And if they're not warranted, I'm going to call it anxiety. So hopefully that's a distinction that's potentially helpful. So what is anxiety? It is a false alarm of the fight or flight response. So when our brain perceives that there is something threatening in our environment, it immediately enacts the fight or flight response. And so what is the fight or flight response? It's an automatic system that gears you up to either fight this threat or to run away from it, because its purpose is to save your life. So if you see a bear in the woods, a wide variety of things are going to happen to your body that are going to help you to run away or fight that bear really well. So your pupils will dilate so you can get more light in so you can see really well. Because if you're going to run away from a bear, it really helps to be able to see well. Your heart is going to pump faster and harder. And so that is going to deliver more oxygen to your muscles, making your muscles be at peak performance so that you can run faster, because that's going to help you. Adrenaline increases, digestion slows, because you don't want to be digesting food when you need that energy to be running away from the bear. So all of these things don't require, you don't have to make them happen. They just happen automatically. And they do help you. In the case of the bear, you have a better chance of running away. You're, running away, or you're fighting the bear at peak performance. Anxiety, though, happens when you get that fight or flight response, but in the absence of a real stressor. So you might stand in front of the classroom to give an oral report, and your pupils dilate and your heart is beating really fast and you're sweating because your body thinks it needs to keep you cool so you can run away or fight really well. But in fact, there is nothing threatening. There's nothing actually threatening as you're giving an oral report in front of the classroom. So that anxiety is really a false alarm. The fight or flight is ringing saying, hey, danger, danger. But in fact, there really isn't any danger. Some reason I can't, let's see. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. I had some problems forwarding my slide. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about anxiety. It is absolutely healthy. We need some anxiety, right? Otherwise we wouldn't run from bears. And it's normal. I love to talk about anxiety because everybody can relate to it, because everyone experiences it to some degree. Some people have a hair trigger, so that alarm, that false alarm goes off really easily. And some people have a really slow trigger, so it really takes a lot for them to trigger that response. I sometimes will tell the story of my husband and I were driving down the street. He is a neuroscientist, by the way, so we sometimes talk nerd talk, and we happen to be doing that this particular day. So I was driving down the street and a car pulled out and very nearly hit my husband's side of the car. And I had a full sympathetic nervous system response, a full fight or flight response. So, I'm driving, the car almost hits us. I go, ah! you know that feeling. And I look over to my husband, who would have been the one impacted. The car did not hit us, thankfully. And I said to my husband, I just had a full sympathetic nervous system response, fight or flight. And he said, "You did?" And I said, "Yes, you didn't." And he said, "No, it takes a lot more than that, to get my fight or flight system to go off." So I think that's a really useful way of talking about anxiety and seeing that while it is healthy and normal, and everyone has that trigger that rings that alarm for threat, it's set at different levels. So my husband's alarm rings, well, in this particular example, it seems it didn't ring when it probably should have. And, other people, they've got that alarm ringing when it doesn't really need to ring because there isn't a threat. And that really helps to, I think, explain the difference between people who are higher anxiety and people who are lower anxiety. And we do want a little bit of anxiety because it keeps us safe. So, anxiety keeps us from walking in areas where bears are known to inhabit, or it helps us to look both ways before we cross the street. So a little bit of anxiety is a good thing. Too much anxiety, I don't have to tell you, is not a good thing. Anxiety also happens to be the most common youth mental health disorder in the United States, not just in the United States, but actually around the world. This is really also true for adults. If you talk to a depression researcher, they might tell you depression is number one, but suffice it to say, anxiety and depression are way up there for both children, adolescents, and adults, with substance use disorders coming in at number 3. Anxiety impacts every aspect of a person's life, as you might imagine. It's almost like a personality characteristic in that you sort of carry around this tendency to respond with anxiety. So it happens in your social life. It might happen in your career. It just is, it's with you and impacting all that you do throughout the day. And it does appear that while anxiety can sometimes go away, and anxiety does eventually go away. So if you have a bout of anxiety, eventually, you calm down to your sort of normative levels. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about individuals who have anxiety disorders or who have anxiety that is at a level that is problematic. Most times that does not go away on its own. It has been known to happen. So some children or adolescents might have high anxiety for some sustained period of time, and then in adulthood, they seem to be pretty much free of it, most likely because they learned some methods to cope with it, either in treatment or outside of treatment. But we sure do know that cognitive behavioral treatments for childhood and adolescent anxiety disorders absolutely help anxiety moving forward. So kids and teens can absolutely, and adults can learn skills to be able to manage anxiety-provoking situations, for sure. And we'll talk about some of those skills in this presentation. All right, but I want to talk about how do we know when anxiety is problematic? Like, what are the anxiety disorders? There are a whole bunch of them, and I'm not going to cover all of them, but I am going to cover the top 3. So we call them the big 3 because they're the 3 that are most frequently occurring, at least in children and adolescents. So I'm going to cover each of these in turn. So we'll start with separation anxiety disorder, which largely is a fear that something bad will happen to you or your loved one when you are separated from them. I once worked with a family and I was meeting them for the very first time. Their child was 11. He was a boy. And the parents were describing how he was afraid to leave home at night. So he wouldn't go to a friend's house at night, for example, but he might go to a friend's house during the day. And when the parents questioned him about why won't you go to a friend's house at night, he would say, because I'm afraid you're not going to pick me up. And the parents really wanted me to know that they were very reliable parents and that it was not the case that they left him places and didn't pick him up, which, after hearing from the family and the child, I knew immediately what was happening, and I knew it was separation anxiety disorder. And what I knew is that this child had come to see the world as a dangerous place. And the world was a dangerous place. And so that if he went to a friend's house at night, because things are always scarier at night, and if he went to a friend's house at night, his parents might not pick him up, not because they forgot, not because they were negligent, but because something in the big bad world would happen to them, like they could be kidnapped or killed or in a car accident, and then they would be prevented from coming to pick him up. So that's a sort of good example of separation anxiety disorder. The way that it manifests, you might see kids who don't want to sleep in their own beds at night, or who won't stay home alone, or sometimes these are the kids who are going frequently to the school nurse's office, because once they're in the school nurse's office, sometimes the school nurse will allow them to talk to their parent at home, and then they get that reassurance that their parent is okay. So anyway, in short, it is worried that something bad will happen to the child or to a loved one when they are separated. Now, generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, is best characterized by kids who you would describe as a worrier, a worrywart, even better. So they are individuals who worry pretty much across the board. They can always find something to be worried about in any situation, and they very frequently are worried. So they're worrying about a wide variety of things, not just one thing. If you're just worried about one thing, that will not qualify for generalized anxiety. It has to be a multitude of things that you worry about. You have difficulty stopping the worry more days than not, and you worry pretty consistently for at least 6 months or more. So this is not intended to capture somebody who's worried about the health of a significant other. That certainly would not be generalized anxiety disorder. But if you're worried about your pet's health, your parents' marriage, your performance in school, whether your friends like you or not, and add a few more things to that, and you worry about it all the time, and that worry gives you stomach aches and muscle tension, might interrupt your sleep. Now we're really kind of talking in the range of what generalized anxiety disorder looks like. And then we have social anxiety. Social anxiety basically is a fear that you will do something that is stupid or dumb and others will negatively evaluate you. So you might be afraid to raise your hand in class because you might stutter or you might get the answer wrong, and other people will either laugh out loud, or maybe they won't laugh out loud at all, but they might change the way you perceive, or you believe they might change the way they think about you. And they might think in their head, oh, that was dumb. How did you get that wrong? Social anxiety can be generalized, meaning you worry in all kinds of social situations that other people are negatively evaluating you, or that you're going to look stupid or silly or foolish. Or it can be specific. So it can be a specific social anxiety that might pertain to ordering food in a restaurant. So it's highly specific. You're afraid to order food in a restaurant because you might pronounce the word on the menu wrong. Or maybe you're afraid to eat in public because you might spit food or have, the spinach between your teeth. Or you might have social anxiety that pertains to going to a public bathroom. Not a fear of the public bathroom because it's germy or dirty, but rather a fear that someone will negatively evaluate you if they happen to hear you or if they happen to smell you. That would be social anxiety, a specific social anxiety. Now, anxiety, as you know, I told you it's in the top 3 of mental health disorders pretty much around the globe. If we look at the lifetime prevalence, and lifetime prevalence means you have it at any point in your life. You don't have to have it lifelong. You have a diagnosis of anxiety at some time during your life. We know that 1 out of 3 people will be diagnosed with anxiety during their lifetime. So that's a really significant number of people. Now, just pretty recently, a few months ago, some of the research on the impact of the pandemic is beginning to come out. And it will come as no surprise to you to find that people are indeed more anxious since the pandemic, let's say. So 41% of adults are more anxious than they were last year. 49% of young adults are more anxious than they were last year. And by last year, it's before the pandemic. 43% of adults say that the pandemic had a serious impact on mental health. 59% of young adults said it had a serious impact. Parents are concerned about their children's well-being. No surprises there, with 29, almost 30% saying kids experienced minor problems and almost 20% experienced major problems. And then almost half of all kids under 18 have received some kind of professional help since the start of the pandemic. So not really any surprises here. However, I do want to point out one thing, and that is to just look at those numbers of young adults versus adults. So this pandemic, it does appear to be impacting children and adolescents and young adults a little bit differently than it does adults. And it stands to reason because of those developmental factors that I mentioned earlier. It could certainly be argued that children and adolescents and young adults have been more significantly impacted in terms of their daily routines by this pandemic. Their social lives have been disrupted at a time when their social lives are incredibly important and formative. And their academic lives have been sort of turned upside down at a time when their academic lives are really important. So I just wanted to point that out because we can see that differential impact in this particular research study. So is there a pandemic of anxiety? It's the double pandemic, I think. Of course, I'm biased because I study and treat anxiety. But I think the research is bearing it out, and the fact that mental health centers are currently so incredibly overburdened with individuals who are seeking treatment, I think that it's fair to say, yes, there's a pandemic of anxiety. And what's interesting to me is that the phenomenon of the pandemic has interacted in ways to really kind of amp up anxiety. So there are a few conditions which are sort of necessary for anxiety. So let me sort of walk you through these. Probability overestimation. So individuals who are anxious believe that bad things are going to happen, and they overestimate the likelihood that that bad thing is going to happen. And a pandemic is a bad thing, and it is happening. And so if you're worried about loved ones becoming ill, if you're worried about loved ones recovering from COVID, if you're overestimating that, which you might be doing just because of the nature of the pandemic, you are also going to be increasingly anxious. I mean, that's what happens in the pandemic. That's what happens in anxiety. In the pandemic, we have a tremendous amount of uncertainty, especially in the beginning. We didn't know how it was spread. We didn't know what would happen if you got it. We still don't really know. The individual responses to COVID are so incredibly different. And we don't, there are some beginning notions about what those differences are caused by, but we really don't know. We thought we knew what school was going to look like in the fall, and now we don't know. A couple days ago, I work at URI, so a couple days ago, I thought in the fall I wasn't going to be wearing a mask. And then 2 days ago, I got the email that said, nope, everybody indoors is going to be masked. So there's tremendous uncertainty. Anxiety loves uncertainty. It feeds on it. So of course, the uncertainty surrounding the pandemic is going to amp up that anxiety. And then low coping self-efficacy. So when I walked you through those awful pictures at the beginning of this talk, if you'd really placed yourself back pre-pandemic, I have no doubt that the vast majority of you would have said to yourself in your head, I can't go there. I will not be able to handle that. That's low coping self-efficacy. I can't handle that. And when you believe that you can't cope with a particular situation, it creates a great deal of anxiety. And then also, during this pandemic, I mean, particularly on the news, we get, like, I'll give you an example. It's hard to sort of estimate what's going on by news reports. So as an example, a current example, these breakthrough cases, so individuals who've been vaccinated who now are developing COVID. Seems like every day there are more breakthrough cases. So I can't get a handle on what is the actual rate of breakthrough cases, because it seems like it's a lot, but yet the vaccine is, I don't know, 95%. I mean, it depends which one you got, but 95% effective, which means that the rate of breakthrough cases should be 5%. But it seems like it's higher than 5%, and I can't really figure it out. So am I selectively attending to those? Oh, there's another breakthrough case. There's another breakthrough case. I'm vaccinated. Maybe I need to worry about myself being a breakthrough case. So it's natural for that to happen. And that's what happens when individuals are anxious. So they monitor their situation, they monitor their environment for signs of pending threat. They're hyper vigilant, looking for signs of danger in the environment. And I feel like the pandemic, and not to really blame the news, because we're all kind of relying on the news, but and I really think everyone's doing their best during the pandemic. So I don't like to blame anybody about anything anyone is doing during the pandemic, because we are all doing our best. But I think that it lends itself towards selectively attending to some, horrifying stuff, and increasing our anxiety as a result. I spent a little more time on that than I intended to, but we'll move on. So I want to acknowledge that the COVID crisis isn't just about anxiety. So I'm highlighting it because that's what I study, that's what I know, that's what I love. But I really want to acknowledge that during COVID and other community crises, it's not just anxiety that's increasing. We've got depression that's increasing, disruptive behavior problems, sleep disorders, substance use disorders, suicidal symptoms, and more and more. So I just want to make that acknowledgement. This talk is about anxiety, but we could have equal and parallel talks about a wide variety of other mental health impacts. So what can we do? Finally, here we go. All right, so I like to take a sort of global view if we're concerned about individual well-being. In this case, we'll put our focus on students, but really any of these things that I'm going to talk about could be extended for anyone. But we're going to keep a focus on the students for now. And I really like to say that everyone's responsible. Parents are responsible, schools are responsible, children and adolescents themselves are responsible, and everyone has a responsibility to everyone else to basically take care of each other. But what I'm going to talk about specifically is well-being as it pertains to your children, your student child. So what can parents do? Number one, ask about your child's mental health. Talk about it all the time. A lot of parents think if I ask about it, I might increase feelings. If I ask about my child's depression, I might make them more depressed. If I ask about suicidal thoughts, I might insert those thoughts into their heads when they weren't already there. Not true. In fact, it's the opposite that happens. So talk about how your kids are doing. I try to do this with my own kids. God bless them. They have a psychologist mom. But, I'll say to them, hey, how's your mental health? How are you doing? How are you coping? Like, this is a lot that we're handling. How are you doing? And I playfully call it the checkup from the neck up. We all need a checkup from the neck up. And, sometimes I give this advice, like, talk about mental health, ask your kids how they're doing. And parents are like, ooh, that will not go over well with my child. And that might be the case if you haven't been doing it all along. It's not like you can playfully say, hey, check up from the neck up, like, tell me what's going on. You might have to start small, but you've got to start talking about and prioritizing conversations and communications about mental health. There's been such great movement towards normalizing treatment and recognizing, there's so many famous individuals who are coming out, acknowledging their own mental health struggles. Most recently, of course, I'm going to blank on the gymnast's name. Oh my gosh, isn't that terrible? During the Olympics, actually, there's so many athletes, actresses and actors who are, coming out, acknowledging their own mental health struggles. And that is good. So continue that conversation into your own homes and keep it up, even post-pandemic, keep it up. Also, parents really need to reset expectations. So what you expected your child to be able to do a year and a half ago, they may no longer be able to do. Because they're burdened. Because think back to that slide of the girl with the box, with the stress pouring out of it on her back. We are all coping with a great deal right now. And I don't want to say let your kids off the hook. Oh no, do not. They still have to do their chores, their homework. They still have to go to school in the fall. But we might work with them a little more and be a little more flexible with them, a little more understanding in finding how we're not going to change the goal, but we might change the means to the goal. And we might just give them a little bit of a break and be a little more flexible in our parenting. Manage your own anxiety. 80% of anxious children have anxious parents. So if your child's anxious, odds are you're anxious too. And manage your own anxiety, because it's very easy for you to become anxious and to transfer that belief onto your child. So it's usually the case when I see a child who's saying, hypervigilant to threat in the environment. There are dangerous things everywhere and I have to be really careful. So I can't walk to the bus stop alone because I might be abducted. It's oftentimes, there's a parent who has a similar philosophy that the world is a dangerous place and we have to be very careful within it. And the world can be a dangerous place, but by and large, people are good and people want to help each other. And that's a whole different sort of frame that you can have. And if you do adopt that frame, it's a little less anxiety provoking. And then parents, do not, if you take anything away from this talk, please take away this point. Do not allow your child to avoid things that create anxiety for them. So it's a very natural tendency. If you are afraid of something, if you're anxious about going back to school, do not allow your child to stay home from school, not even for one day, not for 1 hour, not for 1 minute, particularly school refusal, because school refusal is very powerful, and the longer it continues, the harder it is to fix. Take it from a treatment provider. So there are lots of other things you can do. You want to be flexible. You want to figure out different strategies. You want your child to go back to school in person in the fall, because that's the plan for Rhode Island. And so how are you going to do that? Talk with your child. What are the things? How about if we bring a friend and you walk in with a friend? How about, I don't know, you strategize. It can look any way, shape, or form, but it is critically important that you don't say to your child, well, I'll advocate for virtual, or how about you just stay home for the first day? It's only a half day anyway. And then because your child will take that inch And every day you're out of school, the more anxiety provoking it is to get back in. So avoidance breeds anxiety. Approach behaviors, which is the opposite of avoidance. So actually doing the thing that you're afraid of is actually what decreases anxiety. It's totally counterintuitive. So you think that you're helping your child, or I think I'm helping my child if I remove them from a situation that's creating great anxiety for them, but actually I'm doing them a disservice because I am preventing them from being able to develop coping skills. I am validating their belief that the situation is dangerous, and I'm also validating their belief that they can't handle it, that they're not a good enough coper or hardy enough to be able to handle that situation. And that's a really dangerous message that can be inadvertently transmitted to children when parents really are not intending on giving that. Very well-meaning parents who allow their child to avoid anxiety-provoking situations often do it because it seems like a good parenting strategy, a good parenting move, but it's counterintuitive and actually can be significantly more, it can disadvantage the child in the long term. And the last thing I have on this slide is COVID communications. Talk about COVID. Don't be afraid. Keep it developmentally appropriate. So if you have a 5-year-old at home, don't be afraid to talk about COVID. Kids know what's going on. They hear it. Better they hear it from you than they hear it from a friend in school. So make sure that you talk with your kids in ways that are developmentally appropriate, as opposed to, and again, this goes back to avoidance, try not to avoid important, hard topics that your child might be exposed to. So the earthquake in Haiti, your child might find out about that, and they might find out about the enormous number of people who were killed. And you might want to protect them from that. But do you want some kid in school telling them, or do you want to be able to talk about that sensitively and warmly and thoughtfully at home in a way that is developmentally appropriate? So that's my plug. I mean, not that you have to sit your kid down and watch the news with them, but really be careful about that avoidance. All right. So a few tips for parents. So let's move on and talk a little bit about what schools and teachers can do in ushering back kids into the school year. So teachers also need to reset their expectations. What you thought kids could do over a year and a half ago, and what they could do, you need to reevaluate. What was appropriate then may not be appropriate any longer. And again, I'm not saying let kids go scot-free. I want kids to be accountable and responsible, but I want to help them get where they need to be with warmth and flexibility and kindness, and working together and collaboration, because that's how we're going to be able to support kids to do the hard and anxiety-provoking things that they need to do. Schools also need to do everything they can to enhance connections. So I already talked about how those social connections have been broken, either changed friendships or lost friendships, or just the social isolation and social anxiety that is peaking now might mean that students don't want to interact with other students. But we know that that's not in their best interest. So when you see a student who doesn't want to reach out and relate to other students, try to lend a helping hand and to make that connection wherever you can. And be a motivating presence. There was a relatively recent study, it was with college students, but I'm pretty sure that it applies to high school and elementary kids as well. And they asked college students, what do you want out of your teachers? What is it? What was the most important thing they could be or that they could do for you during the pandemic? And it was be a motivating presence. And those are the kinds of connections that I'm talking about. Connect to your students in ways that are warm and helpful and encouraging, and help them to believe in what they're capable of, but not in ways that let them off the hook. So we're going to hold those goals, We're going to have them, we're going to require them to come into school. We're going to require them to take that test. We're going to require them to do all of those things, but we're going to modify the means to get there as appropriate. We might have to reframe behavior guidelines. There's going to be a lot of kids who come back, and if you happen to be wearing masks or have other rules about distancing, 3 feet, 6 feet, whatever it's going to be this fall, I think it's really important for kids to not see it as some kind of punishment or some infringement on their personal freedoms and rights, but rather that we reframe those guidelines in ways that indicate this is how we care for one another. And so these guidelines exist not because we want to take away your freedom. You're not wearing that mask because we want to take away your freedom. You're wearing that mask because it's protecting you and it's protecting other people. And in a community, in a school community, that's how we care for one another. Regular check-ins, those checkups from the neck ups, and other kinds of check-ins. So it doesn't all have to be about mental health, but could be about a variety of other things. How's everything going in your life? And be consistent and predictable, because remember, anxiety loves inconsistency and unpredictability. So it's important for schools and teachers to be the opposite of that, to really help to sort of tamp down on that anxiety. All right, and then we also have students. Students are also responsible for managing their anxiety as they go back to school. So they need to, and I think kids and adolescents are not good at self-care. I don't even think they know what that notion is. But we can begin to help them to understand what it is. So what can adolescents do? They can focus on what they can control. There's so much during this pandemic that they can't control: their school schedule, where they can go, what they can do within the school environment. That's all dictated. There's all kinds of rules, but there are things that they can control. And they should focus on that. I can, focus on my own safety behaviors. That's something that I can do. I can reach out to friends. I can do that. I can text friends. I can connect virtually. Focus on those things that you can do instead of the things that you can't do. Then I also have up here self-compassion, because I find that everyone, particularly anxious people, and maybe even most notably adolescents, talk to themselves in their heads in ways that are self-destructive. So I'm going to give you a little example, and I'm kind of giving it away before, but that's okay. Somebody once told me a story about a woman who went on a blind date. And after she left the blind date, she came home and she told her best friend about it. And she said, he doesn't like me. I'm frumpy. I wasn't funny. It was awful. No, I'm telling this story wrong, actually. It's the best friend who's supposed to say it. Well, sorry. It's the best friend who's supposed to say it to her. So she goes on the blind date, and then the best friend says, he doesn't like you. You're not funny. You look terrible in that outfit you wore. And people would be horrified if your best friend said that. And then, you're supposed to say, oh, but what if I told you it was her self-talk? And we all do that. We talk to ourselves in ways that we would never let another individual talk to us. And I like pointing that out, particularly with adolescent girls, who I think have a tendency to maybe talk to themselves in their heads in ways that can be pretty self-destructive. So talk to yourself as you would talk to a friend, with love and caring and compassion and understanding. Also get out, go for a walk, go get some exercise. I find that a brief walk assigned to any human being can improve their mood in 5 minutes. It is the most reliable mood booster that anyone can have. So you just have to get the adolescent or the child or teen to agree to go on the walk. But if they do, guaranteed post-walk, they're going to be feeling better, less anxious, less depressed, just better outlook overall. It's really powerful. And then what else can kids and adolescents do? They've got to make those connections. So I've heard from a lot of teens, some can't wait to get back into the social world, and other kids are like, no way. I didn't really like the social world to begin with. I was in bliss during lockdown, and I have no interest in getting back into the social world. And the reality is, as I noted before, we're all kind of rusty in terms of our social skills. So we all have to re-enter the social world. There are very few people who can actually live a life that doesn't involve others. And I really personally believe that we're here to interact with others, that's where the greatest fulfillment comes. So we need kids to begin, they can start small, however that is, a brief, a 5-minute walk with a friend, or maybe they're going out for a cup of coffee, whatever it is, something super small, or maybe it's just sending a text, or waving, if they happen to see them on the street, can start small and then build up, but people do have to gradually re-enter into the social world, and you want to do it in a gradual fashion, small steps before medium steps before the big steps, and get creative about those connections. And then regarding technology, this really, kids were already addicted to their technology, and man, whew, it's only worse. I see it with myself. I've never been on my phone more in my entire life than I have during this pandemic. And so the approach I like to take or like to recommend is not that you as a parent set up rules for your child and then have to strictly reinforce them, but rather to collaborate with them and commiserate with them about the difficulty and the pull of that technology, about how, it calls to you like, scroll some more. And the designers of that smartphone and those apps and that software were using behavioral principles to get you to pick up that phone and continue scrolling, and talking about that with your child and talking about how it's difficult for you and it's difficult for them, and sort of using some what's called coping modeling, which is talking about your own sort of struggles with managing it, and talking about the rules you've set for yourself and which rules didn't work and which strategies did work, is super helpful, because then kids, when they leave you, they've already begun to develop their own personal rules. So that's really what I advocate. Set your own personal rules and really encourage your kid to develop their own and share what works and what doesn't work between the two of you, because it's hard for all of us. So really, we want to strive for responsible use. You can take away a phone, but the reality is phones are not going away. Technology is not going away. And so what do we need to do? We need to use it carefully and responsibly. And we got to learn how to do that together. And then mindset, I try to encourage kids to look at stressful life events as storms that come. Storms approach, and they also resolve and they go away. I like the analogy of storms because bad things happen sometimes, and then they end. Most bad things have an end, and then things go back to some sort of normal, a new normal sometimes. Sometimes you think a storm is coming and you're anticipating it, but it blows over and it doesn't come. Sometimes a storm comes and you weren't expecting it at all. It's really a good analogy to how stressful life events happen in real life. Sometimes they're out of the blue, sometimes they're predicted, sometimes it's this terrible storm and then it leaves and the sun, you get a rainbow and everything seems fine. Sometimes it like decimates everything and you have to rebuild all over. And sometimes you rebuild and it's kind of still crappy, or sometimes you rebuild and it's better than it was before. And life is really very much like that. And then another sort of mindset shifter that I like to encourage kids to adopt is to recognize that there is uncertainty in life. Bad things will happen, and you have to learn that you can cope with it. And you can't always know what's going to happen. So bad things happen. You won't always know when. And you have to learn to tolerate uncertainty and distress. So I feel like life has given us this message that we have to be happy all the time. And so if you're not entirely happy, you have to change. And so we've taught kids that it's not okay to feel sad. It's not okay to be angry. It's not okay to be anything but happy. But the reality is we need all of those emotions, because you can't be happy if you don't know sadness. You can't know love if you don't know hate. I mean, that's just the way emotions work. So we really need a rich tapestry of human emotions. And we can't just chase after that happiness. I mean, it's nice to have, but we have to appreciate the other ones and know that they're going to be a part of our lives. And they add to the richness of our lives. All right. And last, everyone has a responsibility as we head back to school. So a few sort of general tips for managing anxiety: be guided by facts and not feelings. It's very easy to believe that because you feel a particular way, things must be that way. So I feel scared, so I must be in an unsafe situation. I feel stupid, so I must be stupid. When in fact, that's not true. Feelings are not facts. So get the facts and use those. And then use probability, not possibility thinking. So to use a COVID example, I personally am vaccinated. And so it is possible for me to get COVID, even though I'm vaccinated. It's possible. It's 100% possible, but it is not 100% probable, right? So my probability is, I don't know exactly what it is, but let's just say for this example, it's 5%. So my probability is 5%. But if I use possibility language, oh, it's 100% possible. Of course it's possible. We've seen it, we've seen a number of breakthrough cases. So anyway, keep your eye on that. We're not talking about, is it possible for this bad thing to happen? We're talking about what is the probability that it will happen. And then find the good in the bad. I think this pandemic has really hit this lesson home. I hope it's hit this lesson home for most folks. It certainly has for me. The pandemic has really been a really crappy situation. I mean, that's putting it mildly. It has been a horrific year and a half on so many levels. That I'm almost ashamed to say, well, but there was good in it. And that's where I'm going to put my focus. Because if I put my focus on all the bad that has transpired in the past year and a half, like those images that I showed you in the beginning, and that was only a small smattering of the year and a half, I can really get down. I mean, that would be very, very depressing. But if I put my focus on the good that came out of it. So I spent more time with two of my three children. One was away at college, although I did get extra time for him because he had to come home from college. And so he ended up at home unexpectedly. And I had a high school senior who should have been off to college last fall, who I got an extra year with. And I have a daughter who's in high school, and she would have been home anyway, except that she was really at home because she was doing hybrid schooling for some of the year and home for another, home doing virtual schooling for another part of the year. And I really managed to have some tremendously good quality time with my kids, and some great family dinners that were totally unexpected that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And I just changed not to make this about me, but my priorities are different. I recognize what's important: good health, connections, being with people. That has really become incredibly more salient to me than it was before. Anyway, and hopefully you are able to find the good in the bad as well, because that is the key to the good life. So this is the second most important thing. If you want to live the good life, find the good in any bad situation and you'll live the good life. And the last sort of tip for everyone is be anti-fragile. So let me define anti-fragility. There's been a lot of talk recently about resilience and the importance of resilience. And while I am not here to say that resilience is not important, I'm here to say there's something better than resilience. So resilience is when stressors happen, you bend, like a reed in the wind. The wind is the stressor. It comes, it bends the branch or the reed. And then when the wind is gone, the reed goes right back up to where it was before. That's resilience. You bounce back to where you were before after the stressor. Anti-fragility is that there's a stressor that comes, but after the stressor, you don't go back to normal. You go back better. You go back stronger. You've learned something. You have sort of advanced in your development. And I think that that's really, another way of finding the good and the bad. So, we've been stressed by this pandemic. Make sure you're anti-fragile when you come back. Make sure that emerging from this, you're better than you were before you went into it. And so how do I know when a child or an adolescent needs treatment? When it's hard for them to do the things they want to do or the things that they need to do. So when they can't, when their capacity to cope is overwhelmed by anxiety, when I can't do what I need to do, when there's impairment, so they're not, doing well academically or socially, or, they're fighting with siblings and they can't get done what they want to get done or need to. And there's great options now. You can still do virtual sessions. It could not possibly be more convenient. They're online, convenient, covered by insurance. And so where can you go? This is a sort of shameless plug because this is one of the treatment centers that's available in the area. We only do anxiety, the New England Center for Anxiety. We have 2 offices, one in Westerly and one in North Kingstown. I also direct another anxiety clinic. I should have thought to put a slide in here, which is the Child Anxiety Program, which runs out of the University of Rhode Island. And I also just want to make you aware of a great parenting resource that also I have something to do with. highperformanceparenting.com. There's some good information there because parenting is hard. Don't go it alone. I think that says it all. And before I wrap up, I sort of want to put out a request for help. Hopefully it will be mutually beneficial. So a colleague and I, Chelsea Tucker is my colleague friend, and she and I wrote a book together to help families who want to get a child to sleep independently. So maybe the child sleeping in the parent's bed, or maybe the parents are sleeping in the child's bed, and all the parent wants is a good night's sleep, and they want the child to be able to just go, into their bedroom, parent tucks them in, the child goes to sleep. And there, believe it or not, there just aren't good resources to help parents in this particular area. So we wrote a book, and here's what we want to do. We're looking for parents who have kids who are not independently sleeping, and parents who would love to have a 6-week plan, because we would like to give you this book and have you give us your feedback on it. So either participate in a focus group with other parents, sort of going through week to week, what was helpful, what didn't you understand, what worked, what didn't, so that we can sort of tweak our book before we send it off to a publisher. So if that's something, if you know of anyone, or if you happen to be interested in that, just send me an email at ellen@highperformance-parenting.com. I promise I'm not going to sell you anything. This is all just because we want to refine this book. So we'll give you the book, And in exchange, you agree to sort of participate and give us some feedback on what you think about the book and the plan. And final thoughts, you're still standing. We've got to end on a real positive note here. You are becoming anti-fragile. So as a result of coming out of the pandemic or going back to school, handling the stressors of going back to school, you're learning how to manage things that are difficult. And in the words of one of my wise colleagues, Dr. Sue Adams, she tells her small children, we do hard things because that's how we learn to do hard things. And I think that's so awesome. Post-isolation anxiety is real. So I really want to leave you with this idea as you're sending your children back to school. I want you to know, do not wait for anxiety to go away, for you to send them back to school, or for you to send them out with a friend, or for you to sign them up for this lesson or that team or whatever. So the anxiety is real, but the only way to make it go away is re-engaging. And you can't, I'll give you a real quick story. That 11-year-old who was separation anxious, who I told you about, wouldn't go to a friend's house at night. I was treating him and we were working towards practicing sleepovers because he was, of course, that would be like the highest thing on his fear, what we call fear hierarchy. His most feared thing to do would be to sleep over at another kid's house. And he said to me, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And I said, you're right, you're not ready. He was waiting for his anxiety to go away. And when he wasn't anxious about the sleepover, that's when he thought he was going to go on the sleepover. And I made the point to him, you're right, you're not ready to go on the sleepover, but you need to go on it anyway, because the only way to get ready for it is to do it like 10 times. So don't wait for the anxiety to go away. Basically, you do stuff even though you're anxious, and that makes the anxiety go away. So totally counterintuitive. People are waiting to not be anxious to do stuff when in fact you just do it anyway and you pretend you're not anxious, or you just fully admit. I like to just fully admit when I'm anxious. I just lay it out there. I'm not ashamed. Yeah, that's kind of scary for me, but I know that I'm doing it because I know that that's the key to becoming less anxious. Anyway, embrace change as inevitable. Things are changing, things are unpredictable, and the way that you respond to that is your choice. And then check your story, put your focus where it matters. So, we all have a story to tell. We are all going to tell our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, the story of the pandemic, or the story of whatever good or bad thing that's happened to you in your life that you're going to be passing down. And the way that you tell that story is up to you. So are you going to tell a story about the amazing things that you learned during this awful pandemic? Or are you going to tell the story about the awful things that happened during the awful pandemic? How you tell that story is entirely up to you. So even though an event in the past can't be changed, the way that you talk about it and the way that you tell the story about that event in the past can absolutely change. So change your story if you need to. And then last, if you don't want to jump in the pool, and the pool being the back to life. I don't know that we're back to life yet, but we're back to some semblance of life. And so if you don't want to jump in the pool, then dip in a toe, but you got to do something. You can't avoid the pool altogether. You got to dip in a toe. You got to go in the shallow end. You got to put your legs in. You got to do something. So start small and then build up from there. And thank you. I have probably overtalked my time as I usually do, but I hope that that was practical and helpful and useful as everyone prepares to go back to school.
Well, we do have one question from someone who asked, how can I get the book about co-sleeping?
So you can send me an email at either the email that's on the screen right now, that'll work too, or the one that I had up earlier, which is ellen@highperformance-parenting.com. either way. But I can only give you the book because the book is not yet published. You only get the book in exchange for giving us some feedback on it, helping us out, telling us your honest truths. I mean, you're certainly welcome to use it. We wrote it thinking that it will be helpful to people. But we want to test it out on parents and see what we get right, what we get wrong, what tweaks might be helpful. All right, great.
This person says that they are definitely interested in that and that they will email you. So
awesome. I would greatly appreciate that. And for those who might want the book, but don't want to participate and sort of help out, just hang on. And we're hoping to sort of make it available on Amazon at some point in the near future. So you might just have to sit back and wait a little bit though for that one.
And we just have a comment from Patricia who says this was very helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, great. I really strive to make it practical and helpful. And sometimes it's hard because everybody is so different and you're trying to give general strategies, but make them relevant to everyone. So I do hope that there was something useful here.
I took a ton of notes personally, so I think that's a sign that there's so much I want to remember and refer back to. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Your presentation. I think we have one more comment. This was fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this.
Wonderful. Great. I'm thrilled that it was helpful.
Thank you to everyone who attended. For future reference, this session is being recorded and will be posted, I think, on our district website if you feel as though you want to go back and give it a second listen, or if there was something you missed that you want to revisit. Thank you, Ellen, for joining us tonight and for all of this valuable information and feedback. We really appreciate you and your wealth of knowledge. And to those who are here with us tonight, please keep your eyes peeled for future sessions with Dr. Flannery Schroeder, who will be joining us throughout the school year. There will be an additional 4 sessions for parents and families with Dr. Schroeder throughout the year. So we'll be posting those dates soon. So keep your eyes peeled. If you found this session interesting, I think you will also appreciate future sessions.